moving from online teaching to face-to-face and back again, because that's really the situation that we're faced with for fall. And like I said, you can put questions in the chat, but during this webinar, you're going to learn how to identify essential skills for your class, how to chunk your lessons into kind of smaller units, and how to integrate breaks, because we're all going to need that. And then also how to design your curriculum for online delivery, and then how to adapt collaboration for face-to-face, at hybrid and online environments, how to empower your students by including their interests. And then finally, the last thing is really how to have grace and ask for what you need. Good morning, everybody. I got a lot of good mornings in the chat. So, all right. So moving on to the next. Before we get into it, I want you to use the chat function. What is your biggest concern about moving back to face-to-face instruction in the fall? So whatever that is, I want you to go ahead and put it in the chat. And while you're doing that, I will play some tunes. All right, so we've got some good responses in the chat, so I want to kind of dive into those. So we have Carter Bedford once again hits the nail on the head for me. Wearing real clothes. I cannot tell you how concerned I am just about like having to dress professional again and having to physically be in an office space again. I do not want to give up my comfort. I don't want to give up, leggings. It's a leggings or die situation for me. So I completely understand that. For me, it's also the commute. I live in Denton and TR is in Fort Worth. And so that commute was really hellish for me before the pandemic even started. So I have worries about, how do I maintain this fragile work-life balance, this kind of very fragile ecosystem that I have. And I plan to do that by having, boundaries and using the skills that I've learned over the pandemic, essentially. But yeah, Carter, you hit it right on the head for me. You got right to the heart of it. Keith has the question, will there be social distancing, masks, or dividers between two students? And that's not something that we know yet. And I think that goes to, there was another response later on about, Anna Castine, about having to enforce safety protocols in addition to teaching. Our job is to teach, and it's like, are we additionally going to have to require students to wear masks and enforce that? And what's that going to look like, essentially? Oops, sorry, I lost the chat. Let me find it again. All right. There you all are. Okay, cool. I found it again. So Jackie has some good points, restrictions and how things would work for group assignments. We're going to talk a little bit about that, like how you can adapt collaboration for a face-to-face space versus a hybrid or an online space, but that's a really good concern. Melanie has another one. How is she going to teach, activity courses in kinesiology with all the other protocols in place, like for physical activity? And that is a space where the digital can come in. Like, I know Melanie has very successfully taught kinesiology courses online, which just boggles my mind. Diane, yes, your questions are showing up. Gillian, social distancing, CDC guidelines, definitely. We're all concerned about what those are going to be. I think we're going to get more guidance as the summer kind of progresses. Janae has a good comment about smaller class loads. If we're going to be following some sort of CDC guideline that's going to require smaller classes, does that mean we're going to have to teach more courses in order to meet our full load? So, like, say they cut the cap to 15, does that mean I'm going to have to teach more courses? And that's really concerning, and we don't really know yet. Walker Richard says logistics. Susanna says their biggest concern is having to teach in person and some online when someone gets sick. Enforcing rules once you know what they are, and yeah, the real close thing. But definitely having to teach some in person and some online, it's like how, and that's kind of why I came up with this session, because I think there's a lot of concern about, like, okay, I know that I've heard a lot from up top. It's like, okay, we're just going to be back on campus like a pandemic never happened, which, okay, fine. But it's like, what happens when that changes? Like that happened at the beginning of the pandemic. So it's like, what if cases start rising? What if things start happening and we have to go online again? What is that going to look like? And so, yeah, Susanna, I completely get that. Like, how are we going to do that? How are we going to know when students test positive? Are they going to notify us? Are we going to be able to test students? And that's just stuff we don't know yet. So yeah, that's all really good. Good concerns. All right. Meryl has a good comment, and we're going to talk a little bit about this, but deciding what to present face-to-face and what to keep online, and then grading each portion to keep students attending face-to-face. Yeah, because it's like, how much control are we going to have over our classroom? Like, what do we want to present synchronously? What do we want to present asynchronously? And how are we going to encourage student engagement and encourage them to come to class when they could just do things online instead? And is that going to even be an option? I know whenever I taught, I would have weeks where I would have student conferences where you only had to come one time that week, essentially. And that might be some kind of a solution where, you have a week where a student just comes one time that week. And so you have a much smaller class group to work with. So that might be a potential solution. Hybrid teaching, tell me about it, Pamela. Ginger says working with the anxiety of students and managing the coursework. Yeah, that feels like it's a full-time job in itself. And I know we're definitely going to have resources and like kind of mental health things for the students. And then how do we seek out help? How do we create support networks and manage our own anxiety while trying to manage our students' anxiety and teach at the same time? Daniel, once again, enforcing those guidelines and dealing with testing. It's we already do so much as teachers. Like, we wear so many hats, but it's like, I know that I have a pandemic pedagogy group on Facebook, and a lot of people were like, okay, are we going to be disinfecting the spaces now as well? Like, do I add a janitor hat to my list of hats that I wear? Stephen has a really good point. Like, how do you manage conflict when a student doesn't want to comply? And hopefully TCC will have more guidance on that. It is my hope I obviously, like, I'm not in charge and I don't make these decisions. It's my hope that they will have some kind of protocol in place where we can know if a student has been vaccinated. But yeah, Stephen, I don't really, yeah, I can't even imagine, because I know that a lot of retail workers have had to do this during the pandemic, especially now that the mask mandate has been dropped. A lot of businesses are having to enforce that. And it's really unfair to kind of put those retail workers at the front line. They're making minimum wage. And it's like they have to tell somebody to put their mask on, and that person is going to get belligerent. Like, what do you do? So I think that is a concern that is very valid. Number of students in the classroom, says Glenda. Archie, biggest concern is the lack of guidance for returning to face-to-face. Yeah, like whenever they made the announcement and the board said, we're going back face-to-face, it was just like, what? I wish they had made it later in the summer when we had gotten some more guidance and like had some more. I wish they had developed more protocols. I know that that's what they're doing right now, and hopefully we can get some insight into what that's going to look like. Kristen says, concerns are instructors getting COVID. Subs aren't realistic for us for 2 weeks. Yeah, because you have to kind of quarantine for 2 weeks. So what are we going to do? And that's kind of, that's so frustrating, because it's like you get COVID and it's like you shouldn't work for 2 weeks. You should be at home healing. So how are you going to deal with that gap? Essentially, like, are you going to assign students stuff? Are they going to hand that load off to another instructor for the 2 weeks? Like, what is that going to look like? And we don't really know. Yeah, no social distancing in the classroom is also a concern. And that goes to Dawn's concern about the class sizes. Yeah, in the huge lecture halls, it's like, how are we going to do that? Like, how are we going to space people out? Are we going to put like an X on every other chair with tape? Is that going to be how it is? I think that ideally, and we'll talk a little bit about this in the presentation, choosing what to do in person and choosing what to do virtual, I think, is going to serve us really well in this regard. So that way, if the stuff, reserving the bigger stuff for online and doing small kind of group stuff in the classroom physically. At least that's what we're trying to do during Connections Week, and trying to figure out, like, okay, maybe the bigger things need to be virtual, but if we're going to have small group things, small group gatherings, we can do that physically and safely with social distancing and guidelines. Let's see. Going back to Archie. So I'm praying we are not required to deliver face-to-face and create videos of each lesson. Oh, God, no. I would not want that to be a requirement. We're going to talk a little bit more about planning for virtual delivery and how that's basically the best practice. But I don't even know if every room is equipped with a camera and audio to capture. And so having those online materials is really going to supplement your teaching. Diane, is it your job to take this concern? It's not. So like for me, I'm aware of what's happening at a higher level, but I really don't have a say in it per se. Yeah, Susanna, I teach all my classes in lab, 24 in a lab, and you can't really space them out. Yeah, because the stations are static. Yeah. Erin, waiting until the last minute to find out logistics. Definitely. Oh, and Sammy Shepard says, on a positive note, our program has been back on campus already. They have been very good, not challenging about masks and coming online if symptomatic. The few that needed to send in a copy of their negative test before coming in did without complaining. So hopefully that is an indication of what the future holds, but we really don't know. So that's what this session is about, is kind of like exploring and troubleshooting different ways to adapt, because I feel like that is going to be the key thing in the coming semester, in the fall semester. It's going to be about being able to adapt, and it's about being flexible, and it's about being understanding. So much like it was when we went online, the rush to online back in March of last year, we're going to have to use a lot of those skills again as we adjust and kind of remain flexible, because we might have to have a student who's in the class and who gets COVID and then they have to leave. Well, we're going to have a hybrid option for them, maybe partner them with somebody who is in the class physically. That way they have an anchor and stuff like that. Yeah. Sammy, you're totally right. All these concerns will need to be resolved as we move along. I have taught the fall 2020 and spring 2021 online in 2 days in the classroom with no problems. That's really encouraging. So hopefully we can get more of this resolved. But I would just, at this point, I'm just taking it day by day, essentially. And I'm waiting until, June to kind of like maybe start freaking out. We'll see. But the first thing you want to do in order to facilitate this move, or like to remain flexible, is you want to identify the essential skills in your class. So identify those skills that are going to be foundational before that student moves on to another class, right? So in like Comp 1, which is what I teach, they need to be able to basically think critically, right? That's a foundational skill that they need before they move on to Comp 2. And like that is essential. So that would be an essential skill, right? You should also be open to eliminating some of the learning objectives that have been covered in previous classes, or that your students can demonstrate proficiency in. One way that you can do this is actually you can poll your students, and kind of once you've decided on your list of essential skills, you can poll students to see like, which of these do you have experience with? You can have them rate their experience. You can also create a sort of assignment where it is kind of a pre-assignment to your course, where it allows that student to demonstrate their proficiency in that skill before you decide to drop it. But that's one way you can do that, is actually involving the students in the design of the course. And that has worked quite well for me in the past. And I've been able to drop certain things where it's like, okay, you don't necessarily need to know about MLA citation. You kind of got that in a previous class. Looking at the chat again. Oh, Candace says, I've put forth to our tech team, Rick Siegel, he's a great guy, a request for the ability to record our lectures in the classroom. Not sure if and when this will happen. Yeah, I don't really know what that's going to look like. It would be ideal if we could record, but that's just a whole extra load. I know for Connections Week, we're looking at some live streaming options, and basically it's double the work. Like you have to set up the speaker with a lapel mic, and then excuse me, with a lapel mic, and then have audio visual stuff going on, and then stream it through Teams essentially. And so that I can do that because I have a team of people helping me, but the average teacher is probably going to be doing it on their own. And I think that goes back to who was it? Archie, what Archie said about like, are we going to be required to do both? And I just don't think that that's feasible. So first you want to identify those essential skills. Once you do that, you want to chunk your lessons into smaller pieces. And this works for you in a couple of different ways. What it does, if you make it more segmented, if school is interrupted, if all of a sudden we have to go back to online, it's less of a disruption, essentially. So like, say you have to break off and it's like, okay, you've got that session already broken up into like 3 or 4 pieces. There can be a break or an interruption, and then you can continue. This also helps if you can figure out which lessons can be in person or synchronous, and which pieces can be asynchronous or online. And this is something that you can do to really determine like what is the best genre essentially for teaching, or the best environment for teaching this skill. I know with lab stuff, a lot of that stuff is hands-on. Right now I'm working on the Biomedical Opportunities Academy, and it's fully virtual, but students will receive kits with the materials that they need to participate in the lab experiments. So that could also be an option, but just determining what is best a fit for synchronous instruction and what is best for asynchronous, and being really flexible about that can be really helpful. Kristen has a comment. I can't imagine a whole math class having a certain topic, but hey, you never know. Oh God, I assume we get paid double for rolling class in person online. Unfortunately not, and that's the frustrating thing about this, especially when we went on online in March, is that I know a lot of other campuses, at least based on the conversations we're having on social media, were requiring teachers to do like high flex, which was like basically they were in the classroom some of the time and then also online, and that was just a lot to take in. Yeah, Candace, know how to use a calculator, check, double paid dreams. I wish. And then also you want to allow breaks. I know that it can be tempting to, we're in the classroom physically, let's just jump into it and like get it all done. But please allow breaks for your students so that they can process the information before you move on to new information. And one way that you can do that is by cycling through different types of assignments. So I like to do an instructor lecture followed by some collaborative practice, followed by feedback, and then individual work. And you can kind of mix and match these and kind of, come up with assignments that fit these criteria in order to vary what they're doing. I feel like if you come at it from a bunch of different angles and different ways, students are more likely to feel engaged and also to retain the information. And then also, the reason you need to build in breaks, and we're going to talk about a little bit about this later, is that face-to-face teaching can be physically exhausting. I think that's something, online teaching is exhausting in its own way. But I remember when I was in grad school and I hadn't taught for a while, it was after grad school. I was working at UNT, hadn't taught in a while. I decided to do a night class from 6 to 8. And oh my God, I remember going in there and just being completely wiped afterwards, because teaching in some ways is very much a performance and it can be physically draining. So those breaks that you're going to build in for your students in your curriculum, they're also going to benefit you. So that you can kind of process what's happening and then also give yourself time to replenish, because face-to-face teaching can be very physically exhausting. Next, design for online delivery. I feel like that's the biggest thing. It's going to serve you really well, because if we do move to online all of a sudden, say, like cases start going up and TCC is like, nope, we have to go back to online. Well, you already have everything done essentially for that. And just because we're going back to face-to-face learning doesn't mean that digital instruction is going away. We have developed so many cool pedagogical tools and practices and techniques, and it would be a shame to kind of throw out the baby with the bathwater. So use that to your advantage. So still be creating those engaging lessons with embedded videos and step-by-step instructions. So this was a lesson from my WorldLit 2 course, and you can see it has, the due date, their objectives, and a checklist, right? It's always a good idea to have a checklist. I love checklists. I love crossing things off. And you can see that I have an embedded PowerPoint, right? So keep doing what you have been doing, essentially, when you teach online, because that's going to allow you to do something like flipping your classroom. So say we are back to face-to-face, right? You can have students access those resources, access the module for that week, and then once they've accessed that and read it, you can have the discussion take place either online or it can take place in the classroom. So that's one way that you can use this material to flip your classroom and have a better, more effective use of your face-to-face time. And I think that that's worth thinking about and remembering, is basically what is really good for face-to-face, right? Like, what do we want to teach face-to-face, and what do we want to teach online? Which genre is better for that? All right. Moving on, we want to think about adapting collaboration, right? And I love this GIF, I love this image from some e-cards. When I die, I want the people I did group projects with to lower me into my grave so they can let me down one last time. I don't know about you, but I'm definitely a type A type of person. I remember in college, we had an assignment and we were supposed to cover, I think it was like big historical events of the decade. and I really wasn't getting anywhere with my group, and so I just did it all myself. And I was that type of person for a long time where it's like if I couldn't, collaboration can kind of be a nightmare. And so I was the person who did it all. And so whenever I taught, I found it very challenging to do group work, because I would still have, like the one student who felt that they had to take it all on. And you're going to have those students who, just don't want to contribute and they just want to ride off the coattails of their other students. Yeah, Diane says, so funny, but true. Yeah, I have to laugh or I will cry. But I think that with collaboration, no matter what the format, to do successful collaboration, you need a well-designed and intentional group, essentially. One thing you can do when you're organizing groups for your students, and what I've done in the past is I've given them a poll where it asks kind of about their schedule. And this has been especially helpful with online students because we don't know the schedule. We don't know when they're available. So based on their availability, I was able to put students in groups who had similar available times, essentially. So it's like, somebody was available after 4 o'clock on Wednesdays. Okay, I can put you guys in a group, stuff like that. I would also ask them about their area of study, and I would also try to group students who had similar areas or even disparate areas because I wanted them to get that exposure. So just make sure that you're intentional about like who you're putting in the groups. Don't just do it randomly, though that can be really fun for like breakout stuff. The second thing you want to remember is you want to define the tasks and the roles. And I think that this is where I fell short, is by not defining the roles in the group. So each student should have a role in the group of what they're going to do. And that's going to prevent that one type A student from basically taking over the project and doing it themselves. So you can have roles like facilitator, so somebody who's going to facilitate conversation and kind of like I do with this, where like I look at the comments and it's like, oh, this person is saying this. How does that connect to this? Yada, yada, yada. You can have a recorder, somebody who's responsible for summarizing what the group discussion was or writing that up. A questioner, somebody who's basically there to play devil's advocate and to ask questions of the group and their process. You can have an investigator, somebody who has to go away and kind of do investigative work by looking up sources online. And then a reporter, somebody who's going to stand up at the end of the session and report what the group has come up with. So I think by having roles, it's really good for students because it's like, okay, I am this. I am the facilitator, and that is the job that I'm going to do. And it, like I said, it prevents that one student, usually me, from taking over. Another thing is you want to make students accountable for learning by making the group activity one that is impossible to be done individually, right? So don't just take an assignment where you would normally, make it for an individual and just give it to a group, because you're more likely to have a student in there like me go rogue and finish it all themselves. Like, you make it so that it cannot be completed without the input from other people. Also, okay, so talking about, what makes a successful collaboration. Virtual collaboration is always going to require more planning since students are not in the same space, but that can be done, but it's just going to require more work on the front end, like whenever you start the semester, and figuring out what their schedules are, doing a poll, and then organizing them that way. And then what you would normally do in a class, right, in a physical classroom, you would normally do like a turn and talk, like to your partner, like, oh, we've covered this lesson. Now talk to your partner about any questions that you might have. And what I like to do is I like to have students come up with questions beforehand about the topic. I put them into groups and I see how many questions that they can get answered within the group. And I'll visit each of the groups like virtually in the breakout rooms. And then we all come back after 20 minutes and it's like, okay, what questions were you unable to answer? And then those are the ones that we tackle. And so we can use our time more effectively that way. You can use apps like Google Docs. I really love Google Docs for collaborative work because it happens in real time. And I just love seeing, what I'll do is I'll share the Google document with my students, and I'll see like, anonymous ibis or like anonymous possum, just kind of typing in there. And like we did that for I teach mostly literature, and so we did a section on Gothic literature. And so as a class, we came up with a definition of Gothic literature, and it was really a delight to see my students engaging in the Google Doc and kind of creating this definition of Gothic literature before my very eyes. That was very cool. John says, is Google Docs more preferable than MS Word? I think it just depends. I think with MS Word, usually it's saved in like OneDrive, and like OneDrive has to communicate with the cloud, and then the cloud has to communicate with the OneDrive. And so you don't get that instantaneous kind of interaction. I think Google Docs is more effective for that. But, correct me in the comments if you have another opinion. And I already went over creating intentional groups with well-defined tasks and roles. So hopefully these are some ways that you can, adapt collaboration. One way I discussed earlier is if you're going to have a student who's going to be out, pair them with a student who's physically in the classroom so that student can be their anchor. And you can also use breakout rooms, like I mentioned, where you can have students break out virtually and then come back essentially to the main room and talk about, the questions that they weren't able to answer. Candace, okay, so this is about groups. So group contracts that members sign. I love this, including responsibilities, and have the students evaluate each other on contributions helps with the group work. Groups can be created in Canvas. Collaborations can be done in Canvas under collaborations using shared files from OneDrive or Google Drive. Both are integrated into Canvas. That is so wonderful, Candace. Thank you so much for bringing that up. But yeah, I love that idea of like a group contract. And you can kind of have them, you can give them a template and kind of have them fill it out themselves, right? So it's like, okay, we have 4 roles. Who is going to do each role? Like, okay, we're going to write that down. It's like, okay, Jimmy is going to be the facilitator, whoever is going to be the recorder. I really do think that having students evaluate each other on contributions to the group works really well, because then they're held accountable by their group mates. Yeah, group work is, I feel like group work is eternally a challenge for me, and teaching virtually just made it more so. Okay. The next thing you should do is include your students' interests, right? I think that we feel a lot of pressure to develop a lot of the teaching materials and have it be perfect for our students. So say I'm doing a lesson on a certain type of text. So say that I'm teaching them how to write a scientific article. I might be pressured to go and find examples of scientific articles for them to engage with. Resist that. Do not be afraid to have your students do some of the work as collaborators in learning. So in the example that I said, if you are teaching students how to write scientific articles, have your students go find articles that are in that same genre that they might be interested in personally. And what that does is it's something for them to go do, essentially, and it also kind of engages them a little more because it brings in their own interests. And the example that I have here, you might be wondering, like, why is Billie Eilish up on my screen? Please stop. Like I said, I teach the Gothic, and one of my assignments for my students was Goth or not. So after we had decided what our definition of the Gothic was, I was like, go and find an artifact. It could be a song, it could be a graphic novel, it could be a TV show. Go find that and then post it in the discussion group and let me know why you think it's Gothic based on our definition that we came up with. And it was really surprising what the students came up with. So Supernatural, a show that I enjoyed for quite a while, they were like, yeah, this show's totally Gothic. And I was like, what? I really hadn't ever thought of it that way. And they're like, yeah, it's got, it's got obviously things that are supernatural. And it also has, like the missing mother, the messed up family dynamic, all of that stuff that kind of appears in Gothic literature. And I was like, whoa, this is cool. They also talked about like My Chemical Romance being super Gothic and having that dark aesthetic. And then also it's the same with Billie Eilish. And so it was really astounding to see how my students were basically kind of like creating their own knowledge and bringing in what they were interested under the umbrella of the Gothic, essentially. Yeah. Going back to the chat, Robin says, yeah, if they grade each other, then they get it done. Snitching works. Snitches get stitches. Kristen's like, literature. Bleh. Come and take my class, Kristen. I think you would like it. So yeah, have them go and get materials that are based on their area of interest. You can also have students, just like we did with the definition of the Gothic, you can have students create a wiki together for your class, where you guys kind of create knowledge and encourage collaboration together. So kind of like creating those definitions of things and having them put examples. That's one way you can really encourage collaboration and group knowledge making. If you're like a history teacher who's studying an ancient civilization, you can have your students find articles and videos that are within that topic so that they can share what they're interested. So it's like, oh, we're going to do ancient Rome. Somebody's going to look at the Colosseum. Somebody else is going to look at, the religious structure or whatever. So kind of giving students that opportunity to participate in their own learning and be involved and engaged in their own learning. And if you want to put in the chat, what are some ways that you have maybe done this? Like maybe you have encouraged your students to kind of bring in their own interests and bring in materials that you would otherwise not have done. And I think what this does is it relieves some of the pressure on us as teachers, because we already have enough to do. And it also, encourages our students to become collaborators and to become co-teachers, which I feel is one of the best ways to actually learn. So, hey, Chad. Sammy says, my math class process these 2 semesters, 1 day live online, Blackboard, collaborate, and recorded to post afterwards, 2 days live in the classrooms, masks required, also recorded to post in course board. I like handouts that I had posted in the course board so students could print it themselves. I feel like that's a really good thing to kind of have students do it themselves, so their pressure is not on us to like provide that, because that's just one less thing to do. All test quizzes and interactive homework were performed in the course software. XYZ homework problems. I had to use 2 laptops in the classroom, one for the presentation, board lecture, and one to present live and record for students, which chose not to attend the class but view live online. Sammy, God bless. That is a lot to do. And I feel like moving into fall, we're going to be kind of faced with a lot of these situations, just like we were when we went fully online last March. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing your experience. Keith says, I have a discussion board for every week. However, my last discussion board is a topic that interests you, and then use some of those for the next term. I really like that idea. I've done that before I had an American Lit class, and they had a blog post that they had to complete every week. And then the last one, I just put choose your own adventure. And it was like, you just get to decide what you want to do with this. And not only does that save me from coming up with a prompt, but it allows them to bring in their interest and to bring in their experiences, and thus they are more engaged. Good stuff, guys. All right, and then the final thing you need to do is have grace and ask for help. This is going to be an adjustment. It's going to be an adjustment for you, and it'll be an adjustment for your students. Like I said, face-to-face teaching can be very physically taxing, and not only that, we've been in quarantine for so long that I think even though we are going to be following guidelines and things are quote unquote safer, I think that there's still going to be a lot of anxiety about going back to the normal, going back to the way things were. I know I attended a social function recently that was outdoors, and it was interesting kind of just seeing how much I had changed during quarantine. I'm usually a very extroverted person, and I like to perform, and I get kind of frantic about it. But whenever I went, I realized that that wasn't me anymore, and I just kind of hung back and let the more animated people talk, and it was really nice because I wasn't exhausted after. I hadn't expended as much energy. So I think that the pandemic has changed a lot of us, and not everybody is going to be eager to get back into the classroom, and so we're going to have to deal with that. We're going to have to deal with those difficulties, and so just have that grace and that compassion for yourself, just like we did in last March. It was all about having compassion for yourself and not being able to figure out the technology and just being really forgiving, we're going to have to extend that grace to ourselves also in the fall, even though we're going face to face. And you might get frustrated with yourself, like, hey, I've taught face to face all my teaching career. Why can't I do this? There will be things that pop up. So just kind of give yourself a break, cut yourself some slack. Robin, oh my God, the meme, I cried so much last year. Yes, there were many tears. Many tears were shed. It is an ocean. And the other thing is build a support network of IT professionals, instructional designers, administrators, and other teachers. So I have a thing that I do every other Friday, which is Faculty Lounge, where it's just me and teachers, and I send it out to everybody, and anybody who just kind of chooses to drop in can ask a question about teaching, technology, how to set up certain things, how to deal with certain apps. So that's one way that I've created a network for myself. But yeah, create that support network for yourself, because you're going to need it, because you can't put it all on one person, right? You need to spread it around. You need multiple people who can provide something for you as you're going through this difficult time. And it will be a difficult time. I don't think we're just going to go back to normal in a snap like that. It's not going to be that easy. Also know when to step away if something is just not working. I had to do this with online teaching, or when we went fully online in March, trying to figure things out, trying to figure out the technology. Sometimes you just have to step away if something is not working, and that is not a failure on your part as an instructor. It doesn't mean that you're a bad person or that you're any less dedicated than the thousands of teachers who have been doing this. It just means that you need time. So please, please, please remember to do that and to not give yourself a hard time. And also, give yourself that grace and know who that you can ask for help. I feel like a lot of you guys, if you're here, you've done that already. Just by coming here, you're like, I need help, essentially. Continue to do that and don't have any shame in that, because we all need help, and kind of work on those boundaries. All right, guys, so you completed the webinar. Thank you for joining me this morning. Please reward yourself with something nice, and have a great day. You can follow me for more teaching resources.